Since 1878, we've forged talents, industrialized skills, and nurtured minds. We all face challenges, but it is how we come together to overcome them that counts. We work with educators, employers, and governments in over 100 countries to get people into a job, progress in the job, and onto the next job. We are apprenticeships, T-levels, technicals, and traineeships. We are engineering, health and care, and construction. We are aspiration, opportunity, and ambition. We are City and Guilds. No one is better qualified.
Good afternoon, delegates, and welcome to Delivering a Multiple Standards Across Business Functions presentation on behalf of City and Guilds. The presenters today has been myself, Bill Twigg. I'm an EPA Strategic Manager on apprenticeship delivery, looking at the future developments of apprenticeships, and my colleague, who I'll ask to introduce herself, Paula Gibson.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Paula Gibson, a Strategic Commercial Manager for City and Guilds ILM. Lovely to meet you all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tell you all about what we've got in store for you today. I have to say this is the last workshop of the AAC, so I think we're in a very privileged position, Bill and I, to almost kind of, round up, what's been a fantastic week, imparting some of our kind of observations and views around apprenticeships, given we've got this last slot, which is brilliant. So what we're going to talk about today is all around why apprenticeship, why apprenticeships work and how they can create, like a skilled workforce. We're also going to talk about how you, whether you're a training provider or whether you're a dedicated apprenticeship team working inside a large organisation, how you can help your employers build a better trained workforce. We're also going to look at, there are multiple standards out there to support multiple functions within your organisation. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what's available and then some insights and lessons from employers. And I've just come off the employer panel that was happening before this workshop. So I've gathered some really great insights, not just from that, but also from the week itself. So we've got some real fresh insight to what employers are thinking about at the moment with regards to apprenticeship. So it's great to have you all along, and I'm going to hand back to Bill for the first slide.
Right. So what I'd like to show you with this slide is that what we've done over many years is we've collected information and data, and there's been many surveys of employers looking at the true value of apprenticeships. Apprenticeships traditionally has been an area which has been mainly on the skilled blue-collar economy, but now with the new government policies and the new apprenticeship style, they actually go right up into the very high professions, into doctors and solicitors in professional industry. But within each of those, the reason that they have turned to these apprenticeship models is it's usually because there are skills which are not readily available in the market, in the skills market. So there is a well-known and understood skills gap, as well as areas where they have also found that they have a tradition and a culture of home-growing talent within their organisation. So the major priority for them is really to future-proof their workforce so they can carry on their business. It also has the ability to develop the workforce in general, because generally where there are healthy populations of apprentices, there is usually quite good working conditions across that particular area or department. The apprentices have a tradition of staying with companies because this is quite a large investment on behalf of companies, even after you get the levy to support the training and development of the apprentices. There is still an awful lot of input from the workforce and the tradition of handing down skills and knowledge by the employees within the business, as well as the opportunity to actually get fresh ideas and fresh blood into the business with the young people, and not always young people, some older people that are apprentices that are in the business. And as far as the return on investment is concerned, the skills gaps that they actually fill really make a difference to the business, because without being able to have those particular skills, organisations have found that it would be difficult to carry out their objectives and obviously meet the business demands and profit margins that everybody requires. So if we move on to the next slide. As I mentioned before, about 40% of the population, of the workforce population, and this is the labour, the statistics around the labour workforce, but also now ever-growing presence of the professional workforce, is that the popular workforce is becoming a much larger percentage of apprenticeships undertaken. And all apprenticeships have traditionally followed this particular route, and this route seems to hold fast, whether it's more for skilled workforce or even the professional workforce of the business. There are four real main stages which is clearly in the development and running of a successful apprenticeship. The first area, it would be no surprise, is to really understand, have you got the right apprenticeship? And this is where the skills analysis and also looking at the proper recruitment and induction of apprentices is crucial to make sure that we get the right content and the right stepping into an apprenticeship to make sure that we have a successful journey through the skills development of that person. As far as the delivery of the apprenticeship is concerned, traditional on the job and off the job is always very valuable, but these clear high value development of apprentices happen primarily on the job. On the job, this is where they really get the development that they need to undertake some really sophisticated processes or skills or professional techniques that's needed, and that is usually done through traditional mentoring or structured development of those apprentices in the workplace, working on live situations, which really gives apprenticeships a much superior output of a person than what many other traditional development programs would in the skills education environment. Once we get past to that part of the development, then what we need to do is to make sure that the mastery or the success of the apprentices can be formally recognised. So I think that this is more of a value in particular for the apprentice. It gives them transferable skills and occupations and professionalisms, but also before we would release them for this independent assessment type situation, what we would do is we would clearly expect them to be signed off by the organisation and the provider to ensure that they are ready for that independent assessment. And the last part of any good apprenticeship is that this is a start of a career, and it would hopefully open future development areas and career opportunities for an apprentice as they go through their working life. So I'll now hand back to Paula.
Thanks, Bill. So before I just take you through this slide, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about my background so you can all understand where I'm coming from. So I've been with City and Guilds for a couple of years, but I have worked inside large, complex organisations, private organisations delivering apprenticeship programmes. So what I'm going to talk to you now is about, the opportunities of how you can work with large employers. I also, in my current role, I'm a strategic commercial manager, so I work with large corporates, predominantly helping build learning and development strategies, of which apprenticeships is a key part of that. So I've kind of gained a lot of insight in terms of what employers are looking for in terms of their apprenticeship delivery, how we can support them, not just maximise their levy, but actually make the most of all of the standards that are out there in terms of mapping to job roles. And I think this is really what I wanted to talk about in this slide. So whether you're a large training provider or a small training provider, you will be in a business facing role where you're speaking to employers, all of the time around how you can support them. So I think what this is about is ensuring that you understand what their future skill needs are going to be, both currently and in the future. So if what are you going to be offering them over the sort of 5 to 10 years, now to the 5 years hence, because actually it's about understanding their future skill needs. So planning ahead and having that relationship with them where you are almost like their trusted advisor, I suppose, around which standards they are going to be moving into potentially. But in all of that, I mean, I don't know how many standards there are now, Bill, on the IFATE website. Maybe you could remind me in a second, but there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of standards out there. But actually what I found is there's a real commonality around some of the key standards that employers will tend to engage with. So in any business, you are always going to have employers who want some leadership and management apprenticeship standards, and actually there's a whole range of standards out there that we can talk about. Business skills, again, what the levy has really opened up, and Bill kind of touched on this, is those apprenticeship standards in the professional functions. So there's a whole range of things from business admin through to HR, through to legal, through to finance and procurement. So again, these core standards can exist within any industry, any sector that you're dealing with. So what is your offer in that space? Equally, across any business, customer service is always going to be key. And I'll come on to this in a minute, actually, in terms of, is apprenticeships the right solution? Bit of a controversial issue, given this is the annual apprenticeship week, but actually you do need to kind of think about, is the apprenticeship the right route for the problem that an employer is trying to solve? But I'll come back to that. In our last session, we talked about the role of IT and digital services. Now, historically, this would be a discrete tech team, IT team that would sit in a particular part of the business. We're seeing this now threaded throughout most job roles. So in any job role, there will always be an IT and digital function, but this is becoming increasingly commonplace as we see the increase in standards such as digital marketing, which is, cybersecurity, which are becoming real, out of the top 10 standards, we're starting to see these standards really come through. And then you've got your shared services that are always going to be required across any business. So when you think about engaging with multiple standards, there are some core standards out there that most employers will engage with. So what I just wanted to talk to you briefly, really, in terms of how do you engage with large employers across each of these standards? Because I suppose what you don't want to do is just have a relationship with them where you're just talking about one single apprenticeship program, when actually your offer could be supporting them across the wider business. And this is really where I really wanted to focus the next few minutes actually around, how do you have that broader conversation? And I think it's almost kind of like, what is your relationship with that employer? If you're working with a dedicated apprenticeship team, then do you fully understand the governance within that organisation in terms of how the decisions are made? And if you do have that level of exposure, so you're being able to access maybe an apprenticeship steering board, you've got access to senior leadership teams within that organisation, you can really understand what those future skills gaps are going to be. And let's face it, every business will have a future skills gap. And in my experience, it was always things like the latest technology, the latest business improvement techniques, the practitioner improvement standard, for example. How can business become more efficient? Aging workforce. I was working with one organisation where seriously about 60% of their engineers were going to be retiring over the next 5 years. Let your apprenticeship offer be the fresh talent that's coming through to make sure that you are supporting them in the round. And I think that's really where you can have a much more strategic relationship with your employer if you have a really clear understanding. Another thing for me as well is, across all of these standards, is how are you helping them report on the return on investment piece? I know this has been talked about a lot during the week, but it's still the one thing that leadership teams will look at in terms of, do they continue with apprenticeships, yes or no? What has the impact been? How has it impacted on my business processes? Has it impacted on staff retention? Has it really made an impact on the level of sickness that I am seeing in my in my warehouse, for example. All of these metrics are really, really important. So as a training provider, I would really encourage you to think about reporting back on these metrics. You may not be able to have sight of some of these results, but getting closer to your apprenticeship contacts within these large employers, understanding how they need to report on progress and impact is how you can support them in the round. And I think this does come back to the fact that if you're in this relationship for the long game, which I'm sure you will want to be, then it's helping them in a much longer term basis and report on that business impact. And from my own experience, it can make or break a program. If you have some really successful apprenticeship programs within an employer, and you've invested so much within your platforms, your technologies, your tutors, in making those programs work. If you've not really understood what good looks like, then those programs may not continue. So I would really encourage you to get under the skin and understand exactly how you can support them. Another area, and Bill talks about this as well, you could be, and in fact, this came out in the previous session. Across all of these standards that you're offering, it could be a combination of existing staff or it could be new starters. Now, this is a really interesting area for me, because obviously when the levy first came out, and I'm sure Bill's got a view, there was this whole rush for employers to go, right, we need to spend it as quick as we can because we don't want to lose it. I think employers have really caught on now that it's not a quick fix to spend all of your levy. Actually, it's not within your interest, because it's got to work for you as a business, as you as a training provider, and ultimately for the apprentice. It's got to be something that works for everybody. So I think when you're looking at existing staff and starters and new starters, then again, think about the problem that you're trying to solve. And in some cases, and certainly from what I've experienced, an apprenticeship may not be the solution. And what I mean by that is, if you've got an individual in an existing role who has got some issues around being able to manage teams, and they've got an issue around being able to support and motivate their staff, if you then think about a team leading apprenticeship, actually that may really work for that individual, and they can become a great team leader with great supervisory skills, support their staff, increase retention, etc., etc. However, if you've got an issue whereby somebody is actually providing a service to your customers, but actually they're not doing it in quite the right way from a corporate perspective, the customer service standard may not work. Given that what you need is short, sharp intervention to get them really understanding exactly how they deliver great customer service within your corporate values, as opposed to a program that could just take far too long to rectify that problem. So I think you really need to understand exactly what are the business benefits. And I think the other aspect is when you look at how apprenticeships will address some of these talent management issues, then you've almost got a series of categories, really. So one of the great things that I think the leadership management standards offer is that issue around, identifying your high potentials, your kind of potential aspiring managers, your future leaders, growing your own talent to become the next generation of leaders. These are the great strategies that you can use to influence your offer to make apprenticeships really relevant. But do sort of think about whether it's the right solution all around, because what I find works a lot better is not the hard sell. So selling the benefits, don't try and convince them of an apprenticeship as being the right route, just to utilise levy, because it's not always going to be the best route. So lots of things there to consider. And then if I just go on to the next slide, sorry, what I should have said about this actually, before I kind of talked about that, is at the heart of all of this is, regardless which standard, which industry, the core standards will apply to all of these, the core standards can apply to any industry, but there's a whole range of very specific niche standards in construction and retail, and engineering, for example, that would apply to those providers who are obviously operating in a very niche environment. But at the heart of this is obviously the on-programme and the endpoint assessment. And I'm going to talk about endpoint assessment at the end, actually, because even though it's a fairly, it's a fairly commonplace aspect now of apprenticeships, actually for some of those standards that take 4 years, it's only now we're starting to see some of these apprentices come through to endpoint assessment, which actually takes me on to the next slide, really. So this is our business offer. So I speak to lots of employers around apprenticeships, and obviously we've got a core offer in these occupational areas, both in on programme and endpoint assessment. I'm not going to talk to you about each individual area, because I know you've had insight from our fantastic team of technical advisors and industry managers all week talking about these particular areas, which obviously can support you. So if you are delivering, if you are speaking to an employer about any of these apprenticeships, and would like to have a conversation, then obviously do come and have a chat with us. So I think I'm about to hand back to you, Bill, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Absolutely, great stuff. Okay, thank you. Very insightful, thank you. And I would like to tease you a little later on in the presentation about some of the latest information or comments you've had from employers from your previous presentations. There are a couple of questions that would be very interesting, I think, to share and to get the feedback from what you've been hearing. But as far as this is concerned, I think this is quite an interesting issue as well. It's becoming an ever stronger picture where there's a mixed economy of both young and more older people being in cohorts of apprenticeships. Now, as far as the evidence is, and there has, once again, we've been looking at some research and some personal experience in running a training centre several years ago now, is that when adult apprenticeships were first introduced, which was probably a decade ago now, one of the most positive things that was ever experienced was the sobering effect that it had on a cohort of young people going through both the on-the-job and off-the-job training of their apprenticeship. But there was one thing that was really always, to me, that always was important. There were a number of things. There were, if you like, a little bit of magic dust that you need in an apprenticeship for the apprentice to have, to be able to really take advantage of every opportunity they've got and obviously demonstrate the best they can for the business that are supporting them. Communications is always a strong one, and one of the great things that apprenticeships has done is probably done more for the grammar and spelling and punctuation. So literacy has done more for literacy programs than most. It has always been a part of an apprenticeship program for as many years as I can remember, and it has always been that if you take government funding, whether it was levy or pre-levy funding, then you were always, part of those terms and conditions was you'd always make sure that a minimum level of literacy would exist, would be developed within that apprentice if they hadn't already got that ability. The other thing is enthusiasm. This is definitely the magic dust that apprentices have to bring themselves. Enthusiasm will take them a long way within the business and in their apprenticeship, particularly when they get through some tough times and that they really, really love what they're doing and believe in what they do. It's probably the biggest stepping stone, particularly for young people, leaving school, learning things for, as they would see it, for learning's sake, to doing something that has an actual goal and end, and will end up in direct reward for them as professional or craft people within the skill economy. So enthusiasm is a real piece of real magic. As far as work ethic is concerned, that is the other thing as well. And many young people struggle with the work ethic when they leave a much more traditional school type environment. And once again, where you have these mixed economies with much more mature apprentices in a similar cohort or in the cohort, then this tends to help with this particular area about the people that really understand work ethic. They may have been working for 10 or 15 years in a previous related or non-related role, so that, as someone often says to me, it seems to rub off on the young ones. So I think that's a really really important. The industry-specific skills and knowledge is the bit that they tend to love. This is so much tied up, and if it's done well, it feeds enthusiasm within the apprentice. Being able to do something more than what they could before they started, and it being valued by other people or the business, is a real driver to making a successful apprenticeship work. And obviously making sure it's the right skills with the right opportunities within the apprenticeship scheme really would make this the apprenticeship really run well and be a well-tuned engine, because it's clear to me is that the biggest danger with apprenticeships is that that sometimes is if an organisation has a requirement and it doesn't match the requirement of the apprenticeship, then we get back into an old adage that young people recognise we're doing it for doing its sake, and that is one of the great destroyers of enthusiasm. So it is really clear that at the beginning of any apprenticeship, the preparation and understanding about what's going to be delivered in that apprenticeship, and that content is truly valued by the organisation, is a real key step in producing a good apprenticeship. And the last thing is that everybody likes a friendly person or somebody that can get on in the team, lead the team, support the team. So the interpersonal skills and teamwork is really crucial. And most occupations, whether they're at the professional end and there's a lot more independent working, these are still crucial skills going forward as far as an apprenticeship scheme is concerned. Now, this recipe here works on any apprenticeship. But this recipe here is probably the underlying theme that actually drives successful apprenticeships, both for companies and for the apprentice themselves. Right, so I've come to my, we can now move to the next slide. And I think it's back with you, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thank you for handing back to me. So what I thought I'd just talk about now is endpoint assessment. And as I said to you before, it's only now we're seeing some of these long-term standards coming to an end where people are starting to think about endpoint assessment. Actually, what we've learned as being one of the biggest endpoint assessment organisations in England is that, you know, let's think about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, start with the end in mind. So when you take somebody on as an apprentice, whether they are an existing member of staff or a new recruit, you've got to think about what the assessment looks like at the end of the apprenticeship. And I'll give you a comparison. You know, any parents out there, if you've got anybody doing A-levels, BTECs, whatever, you know, you will always look at the assessment criteria at the end of that program. You know, what is the proportion of practical? What is the proportion of exam-based? You know, everyone kind of is understanding of that right at the beginning when they decide to do an A-level in, I don't know, physics or whatever. They'll always know exactly what is practical, what is assessment based. So this should apply exactly for endpoint assessment for apprenticeships. So when somebody starts the apprenticeship, you know, the line manager, the training provider, and the employer, indeed, or the central apprenticeship team, all need to have a shared view as to what the endpoint assessment is, you know, is like. And I'll give you an example. For some of the senior leadership apprenticeships that are out there, you know, when they were first introduced, there were loads of employers that were saying, right, who wants to do an MBA? It's free, you don't have to pay for it. Who wants to do an MSc? It's free, you don't have to pay for it. Of course, people are going to sign up to it because they're not having to pay 30 grand out of their own pocket to go and do it commercially. So you had a whole range of people signing up to these programs, which was fantastic. But only did it dawn on people sort of 18 months in that there was there was an endpoint assessment requirement involved that obviously requires a significant amount of work in order to get through that apprenticeship. So, I mean, that is an extreme example, and obviously that, you know, those standards have really kind of, you know, calmed down a little bit now because we all know what, you know, how great they were. So when I was inside a large organisation, the senior leader programs were very well, you know, they were very popular actually with some senior leaders who wanted to have an MBA and an MSc. But that is a really, really great example of why endpoint assessment is so important. But it could happen, you know, on some of the lower level standards as well. So, you know, operations manager, departmental manager, there's a lot of writing involved in that in terms of assignments. So at the end of each module, you know, managers have to submit an assignment. For some managers, especially who are working for frontline roles within an operation may have not written anything for, for a certain length of time. And I'm seeing this across many, many industries where the business wants to put them through an apprenticeship, but actually there's a certain reticence because they may have not written anything for a long, long time. So it's giving them that support as they go through. So just coming back to, the pathway to success, I think it's really important just to say that obviously, we have a wealth of resources to support apprentices in order to get them through first time. And that's our philosophy, really. That's our ethos, to make sure that our tools and support systems get them through. We have some brilliant preparation tools. Another thing as well is practice. So, and all this can be done on part of, as part of the program, is practice with the multiple choice elements, if that's a particular part of the endpoint assessment. Practice your professional discussion, understand exactly how it's going to work. And before you get to the gateway, and I'm going to say this because it feels like a really obvious point, but there are so many employers out there who think their apprentice is ready for gateway, but actually they've not done the level 2 maths. It sounds a really obvious error, but there are very much some examples where that maths and English piece up front has not been dealt with. They may have got the maths at GCSE level because they're an existing worker, for example, but they haven't proved that they've actually got that particular aspect. So everything needs to be absolutely spot on and ready for gateway in order to, to get them through. And then the caliber and expertise of assessors, of course, those assessors have expertise in those very specific areas of, of those standards. So they will know exactly what good looks like, what excellent looks like. And I think this is really interesting actually for, you as, whether you're an employer listening to this or a training provider, they're understanding the difference between getting a pass or getting a distinction. I mean, every employer wants their people to get a distinction. And coming back to the previous conversation when I was chatting to you about, reporting on success, return on investment, not everyone can get a distinction, because it's not easy, apprenticeships, endpoint assessment, it's not easy, especially when you look at some of these really complex apprenticeship standards that are out there. They're not easy pathways at all. So to get a distinction is, requires dedication and it requires the work. But a lot of the assessment plans will show you exactly what you need to get a pass and what you need to get a distinction, so you can really draw on those comparisons. So I think as part of your role, whether you're listening to as a training provider, in all of this, in terms of an apprenticeship pathway, I think the role, and I've not really talked about this yet, but it's so important, is the role of coaching and mentoring throughout the entire process. Coaching in terms of getting them ready for things like, the professional discussion, or just coaching generally to make sure that they stay on the program. We had a really interesting conversation before about completion rates, where, we've had, a drop in completion rates. So people are actually completing the apprenticeship, has dropped somewhat. Yes, that probably is because of COVID, etc., and a pause in learning, etc. But I think generally there's been a decrease in completions. So we need to just look at some of the delivery styles and think, well, actually, are we really supporting apprentices in the way that we could be, in order to get them ready? And I know from my own experiences, some of these apprenticeships are really, really long. So 4 years later, if they're doing a chartered management degree apprenticeship, which is 4 years, if they're doing that, are they still getting the right support in year 3? I don't know. This is the kind of things that you need to be really tuned into as an apprenticeship provider. So I think, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're done with our slides for now. So I think we've got some questions, have we? Do you want to just see if we've got any questions?
Yep, we've got a question. There's one online currently, and it says, how important do you think the role of mentors are for a successful apprenticeship program? So I thought you might have a crack at it first, and I'll fill in the gaps.
Yeah, definitely. That is a really great, relevant question based on what I've just said, actually. So I think the role of mentors is really important, because when I was at my previous employer, we had a network of mentors who were potentially, who effectively senior leaders within the organisation. And what mentors can do, they can open doors, they can, you know, they can advise you based on their own personal experience in terms of what they should be doing to network within the business. They can open up opportunities for topics for assignments that have a direct business benefit. So I think mentors do two things. They provide that softer support, but they provide that real insight to the business, which gets you as an apprentice exposed to all the different functions within the business to help you raise your profile. So I think the role of mentors is extremely important. I would advise any employer to have a bank of mentors that they can call on to support their apprentices.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to add to that just a little. And I think that if you're an apprentice, you're in a new occupational area, everything's new, having a good quality or a good mentor that really knows their stuff, and some of the best mentors are ex-apprentices, I might add. They really do get to understand what the current apprentice is going through, and I think that they are a major part of a recipe for a successful output of an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that was my 2 pence worth. So
no, I agree, definitely.
The next thing, one thing, another question that's come up, and I think this would really be good, putting on your employer hat with all the recent experience through the AAC that you've had with employers is if there was one thing you could change about apprenticeship system, what would that be? From an employer's perspective, I wonder if you've got some insight for us, Paul.
Yeah, do you know, thank you for that question, and it's really interesting because it's kind of come up a lot actually during the week. I think the one thing, there's a few things I would change about apprenticeships. I think given the amount of youth unemployment that's happening at the moment, and given the fact that furlough ends in September, that's only going to get worse actually. I think it's increasing the accessibility for, you know, people to access apprenticeships that probably wouldn't be, you know, that would feel they were too far away from joining the programme. And this very much comes back to diversity, inclusion, you know, and that whole agenda around getting a really rich talent pipeline. So it's about increasing the accessibility for people who are probably quite far away from the labour market to access some of these great opportunities that is apprenticeships. I think the other thing as well that I was going to sort of say is that, you know, even though apprenticeships are seen as I think we've done some great work with apprenticeships and the brand over the last 10 years actually, since back in my day when I was at the ESFA, when they almost kind of revolutionised apprenticeships. I think that's been a good 10 years in the making. I think we've got a really good sort of brand awareness. Everyone knows what an apprenticeship is. But actually, just chatting to some of the employers that I've been speaking to this week, there still seems to be an issue around the parity of esteem with degree routes. Even though there are so many degree apprenticeships out there, I think there is, you know, there is a lot more work we can do around the sort of you know, around the accessibility, around the, you know, increasing the perceptions, I suppose. Okay.
I mean, there is the other side of the coin as well, and a very similar question that's also been brought up. It's around, you know, is there anything that the employers think that the actual providers could do differently to make the apprenticeship better from their perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do want to just say this before I respond to that question, but out of all the employers that I've spoken to, not just this week, but in my day to day, I think they've all really applauded their providers in terms of how they've managed delivery during the COVID and during lockdown and during where industries were forced to close, etc. How providers have kept programs running in spite of all of that has just been fantastic and phenomenal and really groundbreaking actually. So that's been said repeatedly to me across some of the big large corporates who for many have had to pause for obvious reasons, but also for others they've not paused their programs, they've continued to deliver. I think in terms of the other issue with well, it's not an issue, but the other challenge for providers is that is for them to focus around what they're really, really good at. So, you know, look at the specialist standards that you deliver. So if you are if you are kind of recognised for your delivery in finance, procurement, legal, then really do that well, really do that well, as opposed to trying to be in every single standard and offering a solution to support that employer. I think the other area that I've really picked up on is agility, is agile. So how can you make your delivery more agile? And we've seen through COVID actually that a lot of providers have been, you know, carrying on delivery through blended learning, obviously, you know, doing lots of activities online. A lot of that can continue in the new world, be more efficient. A lot of tutors can actually, do those one-to-one sessions with their apprentices virtually. You know, is it sensible to do it that way rather than having lots of people running over the country trying to see their learners? I mean, obviously it's great to do the face-to-face. I'm not saying that's not a good aspect, but actually I think being more agile and and using digital more, I think is something that is proving to is proving to work really well as well.
Okay, thank you, Paula. There is something, I mean, we're coming very close to the end now, and this is probably the last question for you, and I'll chip in as well. Is what is your future hopes for the apprenticeship system?
Again, this has come up this week, and it's come up through many conversations, and I'll probably just talk about it in the broadest terms. We've not mentioned the L word today, actually. Well, I have actually, but you haven't, which is the levy word. I think, you know, there's a call, I think, for employers, for the government to be more flexible around the levy, especially where they've had to have a break in learning, yet the levy payments have still been coming out of the employer account. So I think there's especially for areas like hospitality, where obviously they were ground to a halt for a very long time. So I know there's a mood for them to really address that. I think in terms of other issues, I mean, I've talked about, equality and diversity, and actually, Bill, we've been, we've gone head to head with our session today with an equality and diversity session that's happening at the same time as ours around that. So hopefully, and actually there was a session on this morning as well, which Kirsty, our CEO, was running around that as well. So I think there's lots of areas, there's lots of challenges ahead. And all the employers that I've been speaking to, they all share the same view, that actually apprenticeships need to be flexible as well. So when you look at the register for approved training providers, I'll just finish on this point because I know we're out of time. I know that the new employer providers, the government have asked for just very niche providers that address the critical job roles moving forward. So any provider that is supporting critical workers, they will get onto they are being prioritised for employer provider. And it's almost like we're moving away from this employer-led system to something that is a little bit more government-led. And I don't know whether that's something that you've picked up on, Bill, in your world as well.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is that we're never going to be able to go backwards because, excuse me. We're never going to go backwards because of the technology. Because of the technology is clearly being probably accelerated 3 to 5 years because of the world we live in. Yeah. So I think we're coming to the end now, and I'd just like to thank the delegates for joining our presentation today. We hope it's been informative and worth your while, and we certainly wish you all a really happy bank holiday this weekend. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Bye.
If I was a flower growing wild and free, all I'd want is you to be my sweet honeybee. And if I was a tree growing tall and green, all I'd want is you to shade me and be my leaves.